Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Centre for Legal Innovation's Digital Literacy Series. This is the Automation mini-series, and we are, believe it or not, up to episode number 3. And what a fabulous one this is going to be, and what a fabulous group of people you've got to be chatting about what should I automate, how to choose the right project. It's a question that's got to be at the top of pretty much everyone's mind at the moment, I imagine. I'm going to ask our amazing folks today, Tom and Gary and Anna, to introduce themselves. So to kick us off, again, thank you so much, Tom, Anna and Gary. And Tom, if I may hand it over to your very capable hands.
All right. Well, I'm going to wait just 1 minute while everyone makes their way onto the webinar. And I'd invite everyone here to have a think about the question that you see on screen, because it's really the topic of today's conversation. What should I automate? And so I'm going to invite you all to throw into the chat an answer to that question. If you could automate one thing in your daily life, what would it be? And Anna and Gary, this definitely applies to you too. Feel free to throw an answer into the chat. Ooh, choosing what to watch on Netflix. Excellent. Gary inspired me to nominate changing nappies. I have a newborn and I'm currently in lockdown in Melbourne and am doing a lot of that. Definitely, Peter. Repetitive data entry is a big one. I remember that from my early days as a lawyer. Gary, love it. A bot to respond to all of your overnight emails. Undoubtedly a pain point we all experience when we go to work in the morning. Cleaning from Janine. Food preparation. Meeting scheduling. The dishwasher. So many things. And Mary, +1s. Gary's responding to emails. These are excellent examples. Keep going with your examples. But I am going to jump into the presentation and get us started. Welcome everyone to episode 3 of CLI's Automation mini-series. My name's Tom. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of Joseph, a legal automation platform that's being used by some of the best legal teams in the world to transform the way they work. So far in this series, you've already learned what legal automation is and why you should care. You've taken a look at using legal automation to solve some of those bigger business problems. But at this point, you know about automation, but some of you might be wondering, where do I start? What do I automate? How do I pick the right project? It's such a crucial question to answer in ensuring the success of your project. And so that's what we'll be covering off in today's session. This episode is for anyone starting out in the world of automation or looking for their next project. Here's what we're going to cover in the next 45 minutes. First off, we're just going to ask and answer the simple question, why does this matter? Why is it an important question to ask, what should I automate? Then we're going to talk about how we identify opportunities. I'm going to share some practical tools and techniques to help you identify opportunities for automation in your work. We're going to have a look at what other people are doing. I think it's really important to hear from leaders in the space to learn about what they're doing with automation. And finally, we're going to end with a few frameworks to answer the question, how do I know if it's a good idea, if it's the right idea? Now, you'll be pleased to know that it's not just going to be me speaking at you for the next 45 minutes. We are lucky enough to have with us Anna Golovsky, IAG's Executive Manager of Legal and Company Secretariat Operations. I'm going to let Anna introduce herself a bit later in the piece, but Anna's responsible for leading and driving change across the Australian and New Zealand Legal and Company Secretariat Division at IAG. We're also lucky to have with us Gary Adler, the Chief Digital Officer at Minter Ellison. Gary has been in the position since 2015, and I'm going to embarrass you here, but was named 10th among Australia's top digital and technology chiefs in the leading CIO 50 index. So we are very, very privileged to have Gary to share some of his experiences in automation with us as well. But just before we get to those conversations, we're going to explore that first question, why this matters at all. Pretty simply, automation projects can and do fail. This is an estimate from Ernst & Young, and it's probably a little on the high side, but it's a good reminder to everyone that we're unlikely to just get lucky. Good outcomes require good inputs. The good news here is that we know exactly why these projects fail and how we can put ourselves in a position to avoid such failure in our own projects. I think lots of people talk about execution as the reason for failure. Whether we planned it right, whether we had the right resources, engaged the right stakeholders, the quality assurance process, testing, change management, and all of those things are super important. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how well you execute if you're executing on the wrong thing. This next quote comes from Alberto Savoia, an innovation agitator at Google and a frequent lecturer at Stanford, and I love it. He says, make sure you're building the right it before you build it right. And so today we're asking ourselves the question, what should I automate? What is the right project? Because by choosing the right project from the outset, not only do we give ourselves a better chance of success, but all of those execution issues, they become way easier to deliver on. And it's something you've probably heard before, but most crucially, by slowing down now at the very start, when we're asking this fundamental, this foundational question, by making the right decision about what we should automate, we can speed up later when we're executing. Okay, that's why it's important. Now let's get into the substance of today's session, how you can start to identify opportunities for automation. I'm going to share 4 pretty practical tools for how you can find those opportunities in your own team. And I'm going to start off with a discovery session. This is probably the simplest tool out there. It involves nothing more than sitting down with your colleagues or your clients and asking them a really simple question. What could be better? What could be better about the way we work together? What could be better about the way we deliver services to you? This is a question that actually comes from Margaret Hagan, who's the director of the Legal Design Lab at Stanford University. And she tells this really great story that I love. She was consulting to a big American law firm who was kicking off a big litigation. And before they commenced proceedings, before the litigation started, they sat down with their client and they asked them a pretty simple question: what could be better about our meetings with you? Because they knew they were going to have meeting after meeting after meeting once the proceedings started. And the client responded that they didn't like PowerPoint presentations. I mean, it's ironic because I'm giving you a PowerPoint presentation, but the client responded they didn't like PowerPoint presentations and they'd prefer something clearer, shorter, and more tangible. And so the firm came up with placemat agendas for their next meeting and the subsequent ones, which had all of the information needed to make the monthly catch-ups work. This might sound like a small thing. I mean, it is a small thing, but this is how a lot of change happens incrementally. And these are the things that ultimately distinguish us from our competitors and help us to succeed. So how can you do this? If you're about to start a big project or you're worried about a particular task, take your client or colleague out for a coffee and ask them what could be better. It's going to give you the best information that you can possibly get to know where the problems are, where the problem areas lie, and which processes and tasks might be appropriate for automation. And so really, it's a deceptively simple way to get one of the key answers to, this fundamental question of what you should be automating. One of the other ways that, and here we come to sort of practical tool number 2, one of the other ways that we can dig significantly deeper into these ideas is through something we call process mapping. This helps us to really drill down into where the problem lies and also allows us to do better planning by understanding where our automation opportunity sits in the broader business context. Okay, so this is a little bit interactive. We're going to do a little interactive exercise here, not too interactive. It's still just going to be using the chat, but we are going to engage in a quick exercise. I want you all to think of something at your work that isn't working at the moment. I mean, some of the examples that you gave earlier were work related. Some of them were definitely more focused on lockdown life at home. This thing that you're thinking of, it could be a meeting you don't like, a task that takes too long, a question you're asked too often. And I'd love you to type the thing that's not working into the chat. I'm going to give you a minute to actually do this. And then once you've thought of that example, I want you to map it out. And so I'm going to step back for a minute after I explain what mapping it out, what process mapping actually involves in this context. What I want you to do is take the thing that, isn't working that well, that you want to improve, and draw it on a bit of paper or write it down as a list. Bullet points are totally fine. I'm actually going to do this at my end too. And I want you to think about where the process starts. So what's the first thing that happens? What people or systems or activities are involved? Where does it end? And what's the output? So I can see some really good examples coming through from Braden. I can see one coming through from Stephanie. I'm going to write in here as well and then stop talking for 60 seconds. Just while you try to write down at your end, you don't have to share these with everyone, some of the things about that process that aren't working as well as you want them to. Okay, I know I'm moving quickly, but hopefully you've had a chance to both write in the chat and write down a few dot points for yourself. The most important thing that we're doing here is trying to identify the sticking point, the part or parts of the process that are actually the problem. We want to work out whether, once we've mapped out the process, whether those things are the same or different to the first problem that we identified. The idea behind process mapping is that it forces you to find the actual source of the problem so you can start to come up with a solution. Often people are too vague when they begin a project, which means they go down the wrong track. The example that I gave in the chat was Joseph's All Hands, our whole company meeting. We do it weekly, it's company-wide. And we recently went through this exact process and realized that in order for it to run better and hopefully on time, we needed a shared meeting template for the whole company to contribute to, instead of each team bringing their own agenda and their own update in their own format to each session. And so we created this shared company template for everyone to contribute to before all hands. It was a simple fix to what felt like a pretty hard problem to solve. And the reason we were able to come up with a simple fix was just because we went through that process of process mapping to identify what it was, where the sticking point was, what problem we were trying to solve. I think this lies at the very heart of answering that question, what should I automate? Happily though, we get to hear from someone who's done at least some of this before. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and welcome Anna.
Hey,
Hi,
Tony.
Anna. Really lovely to have you here with us. Thank you so much for sharing your time. Let's dive into some questions. You are the Executive Manager of Legal and Company Secretariat Operations. Can you tell me what you do in this role?
Sure. Sounds like I need to automate my title, actually. So I manage the operations of the legal department at IAG, and that entails, I guess, a couple of key things: looking after or managing our legal panels and our legal spend and the performance of our legal firms, managing and developing the LCS strategy, the business plan, and cascading that plan throughout the division, and sort of monitoring the performance of our balanced scorecard or the delivery of that plan. I manage the delivery of the strategic initiatives that the Legal and Company Secretariat team deliver annually, that come out of our business planning process. I look after operations initiatives that are designed to streamline and improve the efficiency of the delivery of services from the Legal and Company Secretariat function, and really achieve best practice in our operations. And finally, I look after the risk management of the division.
Okay, so just a small role, not too much.
That's why we need automation.
And so that leads pretty seamlessly into my next question, which is why? I mean, you and I have spoken about this in the past, and you're always such a joy to work with because you think about these things deeply. But why is automation important for a legal team like yours in particular, but also just legal teams generally in this corporate and in-house space?
So it's a couple of things, a couple of really key things. And at its simplest level, it allows us to reduce the time that we spend on low value repetitive tasks. When we've got high value resources, finite resources who are constantly, being brought into more and more strategic and regulatory initiatives that require more of their time. When they're a finite resource, we have to automate the low value repetitive tasks. The low touch, no touch approach to low value work is absolutely the way that law departments have to go. And from a risk management perspective, it also allows us to achieve absolute consistency in some of our tasks, improve our data capture for reporting purposes. From a resource development perspective, it allows our resources to actually be engaged on the higher value strategic things and free themselves up from the pain points, the things that are frustratingly repetitive and don't add a whole lot of value. So I think, it's process automation. It's the way we deliver services, and as part of that, it's also document automation. So the documents that we touch frequently that, don't require a high value strategic input.
I mean, that's actually a really great example, and we'll dig into that a little bit deeper later when we're talking about examples of things that people often use legal automation for. But you just touched on there that IAG uses Joseph to generate legal documents, and that's part of your automation strategy. Yeah. How do you decide which documents to automate? I mean, how's that decision made? Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so I think that as I talked about, you've got to look at where your low value repeatable documents are that your team spends a lot of time on. So it's really about canvassing that information from across the team. Where are people asking for the same document to be generated? And it's a fairly simple task to generate it. So, are there a simple series or scenario of questions, repeatable questions that are always asked when you generate a particular document? Because that can easily be automated. It's also, is it a document where you can sort of say, if this, then that, if this, then that. And if you're playing those questions out as you're generating a document physically, then it's absolutely something that can be automated. So, we pulled together a group of people who I guess are not resistant to change, and who could answer these questions and identify the documents. And it's really important when you do that to think about also the value that you're creating, or the hours that you're liberating through the process of automating. And so it's people who are using the documents that can give you that information. So that's why you need your users to be integrally involved. And further, when you come down the track to implementing, again, you need the people that are touching the documents to know how to build the bots so that they can actually automate the documents in the future. So that's the process that we underwent. I pulled together, and it became one of our strategic initiatives. It was called the Self-Service Automation Initiative, and document automation was a piece of that initiative. And within that initiative, I had 5 or 6 people who canvassed all the different use cases, and then sort of subsequently built the bots.
Cool. I mean, it sounds like there were a lot of moving parts as one of the observations that I'd make there. Can I ask you how you actually went about launching these bots? I mean, that's, I think, one of the challenges that, we encounter quite often is that people build these amazing tools, they identify the right opportunities, they get the right people involved to develop the tools, to test them, the feedback is great, and then they get to the critical point, which is we want to go live. And then there are a whole new set of stakeholders to engage. I mean, how did you tackle that?
So again, I used, my group of key stakeholders in our strategic initiative, and we built out the plan. So we had 4 bots that we built, an NDA, a low value services agreement, a low value SOW, sponsorship agreement. We've got a couple of others that we're sort of testing along the steps, but we had 4 ready to launch. I mean, is your question about sort of everything that preceded it, or just simply from once the bots were built to launch?
Yeah, I think that last 5%, the play, when everything's ready to go and all you want to do is go live. How do you actually kind of wrangle everyone that needs to be wrangled to get it over the line?
So it's just persistence, I think, persistence and resilience. Yeah. You've got to get your comms people involved. You've got to get your stakeholders involved. Our stakeholders, luckily, we had a couple of key stakeholders who had sort of participated in a pilot. That's always, good to get people on board, to bring them into the pilot so they get ready and used to it. And they've been able to give you feedback as well as to what works, and also suggestions for improvement that you can take on board before you launch. We had a range of comms. So we had comms on our intranet, we had comms in our weekly newsletter, we had a post on Yammer, we had and all the posts have to link to each other and link to where the more detailed information is as to how you can access it. We also and then I think you've just got to take the plunge. You've just got to launch. When you've got a good level of confidence that your bot works and it's going to generate a good document that meets your requirements. The other thing we've done is we've sort of done it in 2 phases. So in phase 1, every document that is generated from one of our bots will go through a legal QA process before it's actually allowed to be distributed. So, and then in phase 2, we've got sort of a plan to sort of take our hands off a little bit and let people loose a little bit more on once we've got that level of confidence with the QA, and also that the clients are comfortable, our stakeholders are comfortable in using it. So I think a phased approach, a test and learn, iterative, you're always looking to improve, you're always looking to take on feedback. I think that's important, but comms is critical. So having all of the information to answer all of the stupid questions about how to use something that is pretty damn simple is really important.
That's, I think, a really, really good lesson for everyone to learn, is that so much of this is just about the ability to communicate really clearly to the people who you're getting to build these tools, to the people who are going to be using this tool, what it is that you're trying to achieve together, and then making sure that they understand enough about, the journey that they're on to really buy into it, which I think is something that you've been able to do really well at IAG.
It's early days, Tom. The other thing I forgot to mention is you also need to integrate it into your existing processes. So you need to think about how things can be as seamless as possible. So one of the things that we had to slightly tweak was how we would integrate a Joseph generated document into our DocuSign process, so that we could really achieve a proper low touch, no touch approach with the legal team. So that involves sort of slight tweaks to other processes. But I think if you think about how everything interacts and works together, that's another important thing to consider before you launch.
Definitely. Okay, my last question, because there are definitely some people on the webinar who are earlier in their automation journey than you might be. And so what advice would you give to someone starting out on their automation journey? Where should they begin? Where did you begin back before any of this, had become your reality? Where do we start?
I think it's really important to learn about what you can achieve. So, attending webinars like this, but also testing, getting demonstrations of all the different products out there, understanding how each of them works and which pain points they're, best able to address. Run a pilot. You really learn more when you're getting your hands dirty. You have to be resilient and you have to persevere. The easiest part, I feel, is building the bot and solving the problem. The hardest part is going through all of the processes and approvals and the governance and the security and layer upon layer, especially if you're in a large corporate environment, building the business case, getting the funding. It can take a long time, and you have to persevere because, you really can see, well, I could see the prize and the value, and you've got to, it takes quite a bit of time to put all the planks in place to get there. But I also think you're not going to have nirvana with bot number one. You can't solve for everything on day one. It's very much an iterative process. Start with something simple and small and build on it incrementally. Something like the Joseph tool is really good for that. It allows you to do it in bite-sized chunks. And as you build, you can see where the next opportunity is. And you can really grow that way. So yeah, they would be my key takeouts, my key sort of response to that question.
Thank you. That was really, really excellent. I appreciate you sharing all of that with us. I think there's a theme that comes through both from some of the things that we were thinking about preparing for the webinar and from what you've been saying, that incremental change is actually, worth pursuing, that you don't have to boil the ocean on day one, and that if you identify the right things in your work that are worth automating, even if they're small, it's still worth getting started. So thank you, Anna. That was really great. I'm going to share my screen again and see you again at the Q&A at the end.
No problem.
All right. So I think the next place, and this is another tool that I'd like to share with you now that we've heard from Anna, is looking at what other people are doing. It might sound trite, but it's actually a really common technique that designers use to identify opportunities for change and automation. And it's called Analogous Inspiration. It involves looking at a process or a system or a product and drawing analogies to help you in whatever it is that you're trying to design or redesign or automate. There's a famous example here. There was a hospital in the US that wanted to improve the way it used surgical equipment in theatre. And so it looked at F1 pit stops to see how they were managed and operated. And by drawing on the principles that they learned from the F1 teams in their pit stops, the hospital was able to make the management of its own surgical equipment more efficient, more effective and safer. And so, you know, maybe it's not quite as high octane and exciting, but we can definitely look at what other legal teams are doing to see whether and how we can learn from them. What are the problems they're solving? Are they the same as ours? What are the opportunities they're capturing? Could we do something like that too? And so in this next part, we're just going to look pretty quickly at what some other leading legal teams are doing with automation. So just some examples. There's a whole, these are kind of categories of tools that we're seeing being built by some of the best legal teams focused on automation. A really common application of legal automation technology is apps or bots that automate the provision of legal advice. This category was actually one of the very first applications of technology. All the way back in the 70s at Stanford, there was this bot called Taxman, which provided guidance on corporate tax law. And there's a really great article from the 1970s describing, you know, one of the world's first experiences of legal automation that's worth a read. More recently, an example of this is Kurt, an automated advice bot built by Minter Ellison during the first wave of the COVID pandemic in Australia. And it provided automated guidance and advice in relation to things like employment law, COVID-19 regulations, OH&S, things like that. And it was used thousands of times to help thousands of people answer frequently asked questions in what was a pretty uncertain time. It provided the advice on the spot, 24/7, wherever and whenever the user needed it. And it was used expertly by Minter Ellison to ensure that they, you know, stood out from the crowd, that they provided what was essentially a public service. They even won a couple of awards for it, I believe. Another common application of this type of technology is document automation. And you just heard about the suite of bots that the IAG legal team has launched internally for clients to eventually self-serve some common legal documents. This is a pretty common use case that we see, including, and I wanted to highlight another example, at the in-house legal team at global esports giant Fnatic. They took a kind of holistic approach to this, building a single bot to produce their 15 most commonly requested documents on demand. And they told us that they got a whole day back in time after the launch of this bot, which they used to spend on the sorts of things that Anna was mentioning, like, you know, higher value, strategic legal work, the things that they want their legal team to be spending time on. So document automation, another whole category of tool. The next one is workflow and process automation. It's becoming an increasingly important part of large-scale legal automation, of large-scale legal projects. One example that we saw recently was with a national US firm called Arendt Fox. They built a suite of bots to help them run an audit responding to an enforcement action by the US State Department against a multinational client. They built tools to ensure that the data collection process in this audit across 600 interviews, 17 sites, 4 continents, that it was efficient and streamlined, and that the data was clean and collated and ready for presentation to the State Department. And I think this is, workflow and process automation is a big one for law firms to focus on at the moment, especially where, we see the big four accounting firms moving into the legal space, and it's becoming the kind of thing that clients expect. Okay. 2 more categories. One big category for, some of that inspiration is intake and triage tools. We see this a lot in in-house teams, smaller law firms, legal aid organizations. They build apps or bots to take a client or potential client's information, feed it to the right person, or direct it elsewhere, or refer that person to another organization or team. One of my favorite examples of this is at the Consumer Action Law Centre, a really big legal assistance organization in Australia, where they've been using a bot like this for some time, and they're saving up to 50% of the time it used to take them to complete intake for a new client. And that's time they just get to spend helping the client, which is a really great thing. The final category, and it's not the most obvious one, is education and inspiration. Using automation technology, that decision about what I should automate can connect to empowering and inspiring our teams to work better and to invest in the way they do and deliver work. We've seen this at, one example is the work we've done with Clifford Chance. This is a lovely photo of one of their Automation Academy cohorts, which they run to teach legal professionals throughout the firm about things like this, how to identify opportunities for automation through practice, education, and access to the right tools. So hopefully some of those categories have helped to provide you with some inspiration for where you can draw those analogies with other teams who might be experiencing similar problems to yours, to decide what suits you, what does your firm, what does your in-house team need to start that automation journey. Now we're lucky enough to hear from Gary Adler, the Chief Digital Officer at Minter Ellison, about how his firm is using automation. Gary, I'm going to hand over to you for a second because you have an extremely cool title, Chief Digital Officer. I would love to know what it involves. What do you oversee? Tell us about the role.
Sure. Firstly, thanks to you and the CLI for having me today. This is a topic that's very close to my heart, so very happy to be here. So what does a Chief Digital Officer do? When I came to Minters about 5 or 6 years ago, my initial focus was just on the IT transformation, so resetting the foundations as we look towards 2025. But about 3 years ago, the role broadened with a more digital remit, and the title was then updated to Chief Digital Officer. So it had the traditional IT business unit, which sits on the one side, but adjacent to that, we built out a new group called Legal Operations. And that group's sort of gone from a very small number to, I think there's about 60 or 70 in the group now. And the whole idea there is to leverage digital within our business units to improve the way we deliver legal services, really quite a simple paradigm. That legal operations group is made up of recovering lawyers, legal tech specialists, we've got business process analysts, AI and emerging tech lead in the group. We've got a continuous improvement function as well. And then what they do is they marry sort of the principles around Lean Six Sigma with legal service delivery, process, people, and technology, trying to bring that sort of magic triangle together. I think what's been important is the realization we're trying to push across the firm is tech is great, but tech is the end game, right? We've got to get the process and the people piece right before we turn to tech. And really, I heard Anna mentioning some of the context around making sure you actually understand what you're doing before you start building the tech. Otherwise, you may just be going in circles.
Okay. I mean, I think that's definitely such an important part of this. And it sounds like you guys are setting up a team with a whole mix of skills, kind of like the diversity that I feel like we hear so much about that's important in creating high-performing teams. And it's something that I think that, I mean, our experience working with Minter Ellison definitely sort of bears out in practice. How, you know, if we're focusing on the people just for a moment, how do you and your function teach people at Minter Ellison to identify opportunities for automation? How do you get them to start? I mean, you have this kind of centralized role. Where do you take them?
Well, I think we've been fortunate enough to have a legal operations function that sort of has one leg inside the digital organizational unit and one leg inside our business units. So they are particularly skilled at matching the existing process and pain points to automation opportunities. They're hearing things on the ground, they're seeing them, but they understand where the digital opportunity is enough to join the dots together. You know, we're very lucky they are then connected to some very clever people in our legal service operations team, which is sort of the engine room where all the building happens. And together these groups basically make magic happen by defining the problem very clearly up front, and then having a team who knows how to build and leverage the various automation technologies that we have now across the board. I mean, I think it's also very important when we look at these opportunities that we are looking firstly at the value versus effort, which is the whole return on investment piece. Making sure that we are looking at the opportunity in terms of the technology and its ability. Sometimes you try to squeeze the wrong process into the wrong technology. And most importantly, I think by far is making sure before we jump into these opportunities that we have the right level of engagement from the business, right? It's the business that we're working with. It's a joint venture, as the way I see it and call it internally. And if we don't have all parties committed to the outcome, it doesn't quite work.
That makes sense. I think that piece about bringing everyone along is so important. And it's something that, you know, we learn every time one of our customers starts on their journey. It's one of the questions we're always going to ask. Who do we need to bring along here? Because it's not just about building a tool. I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into that question of some of the challenges posed by automation. I mean, you've spoken here about, you know, effort versus reward. Are there any other challenges that you kind of identify, patterns of things that have kind of made this hard?
Yeah, I think that there's two challenges that are worth noting. There's always a whole lot around the edges, but there's two challenges I think that we particularly focus on. I think the first one is actually defining what automation means to your organization and to the particular stakeholder group that you're working with. It's a very broad term. It's a bit like the term digital or innovation. You know, if you don't define it, you're going to get caught up down the track because you haven't clearly set out the expectations of what you're going to be doing with the automation platform. So a big part of it is making sure you work closely with your stakeholders to define what is meant by automation in the context of what you're going to be delivering for a particular project. It may be small, it may be large, but one thing you can bet your bottom dollar is that it's not going to do everything you expect to do in the first iteration. So it's also, and I've heard Anna talking about that, you know, we spoke about, she spoke about iterations and building a mindset around, you know, starting small and continue to build from there. The second one, which I sort of touched on earlier, is making sure that the stakeholders are willing to get their hands dirty. So for us, sometimes that's our clients, sometimes that's our legal teams. We can only succeed if we create a product owner role, which they very much understand. They commit to things like daily stand-ups or weekly stand-ups. And you've almost got to get that commitment in blood, because what we typically see is everyone's excited about a new technology until they have to do something. And then it gets thrown over the fence and please deliver. But really, I think for a couple of reasons that's important. One is you get much better outcome if everyone's involved through the entire process. So there's not this back and forth. And the second thing is you get much better engagement once the program or the automation tool is rolled out, because your stakeholders have been involved with building it. So they feel particularly connected to what's been built.
Well, that is one really excellent way to make automation sound terrifying. You may only begin if you commit to it in blood. But nevertheless, One of the things that I find most interesting at Minter-Ellison is you do something called distributed innovation. Can you talk us through what that means to you, what that means at Minter-Ellison, how it connects up to choosing the right automation project?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think when I started the firm about 6 years ago, we built an innovation council. And we reflected on that council a couple of years in, and really what was happening is it was something that was happening off in the corner, out of the sight of the majority, or out of sight of the majority. And so the idea was to sort of go, how do we actually get this into the hands of everyone in the firm? How do we get everyone involved and allow them to not just contribute to ideas and forums that we have online, but actually roll up their sleeves and get involved with hands-on innovation? Joseph actually provided us with the perfect opportunity. So whilst Joseph has been amazing in helping us build a whole lot of client-facing and internal bites, one of the things that I loved about it is we could create this sandpit for almost 3,000 staff to jump in if they were interested at any point in time with very little training and just experiment. Build things with very little knowledge, have a go, basically was the remit. And look, at the end of the day, out of that just came a whole lot of unexpected bites. So it's not sort of forced innovation. Everyone's being asked again. Everyone has the opportunity to be involved when they want, and there's a sandpit to play and to bring things to life.
Really genuinely interesting. And it's one of the things that I think makes your approach to innovation, to automation, pretty unique. Gary, with that, we're going to wrap things up, but thank you so much for sharing your time.
My pleasure.
I'll see you in just 5 minutes in the Q&A. I'm going to wrap up the rest of my presentation nice and quickly so that everyone in the audience has an opportunity to ask any questions they have coming out of all of this. So we're on the home stretch now, but we want to ask the big question. So, you've identified an opportunity for automation, you've been inspired by what other teams are doing, but now you want to know whether it is a good idea. Fortunately, the answer to this question is not one we're going to have until we try it. I mean, to both Gary and Anna's point, sometimes you really do just have to dive in, build it, prototype it, test it to know the answer. But there are some places we can start to work out whether we're on the right track. The first thing we can do is just apply some tried and tested frameworks to the idea. A famous one is the desirable, feasible, and viable framework. If your idea is all of these things, then it's likely to make sense as an innovation. We've translated that at Joseph into our own framework to determine whether an idea for automation is likely to work. So we ask these 4 things. Is the task or process frequent? Does it happen a lot? Is it repetitive? As in, does it use the same variables and information over and over again? To Anna's point, do you know that you're going to need X, Y, Z piece of information to generate that particular document? We also ask, is the process valuable? That doesn't mean that it's, the most complex, highest value document. We're asking whether it's a core part of what you do. Intake is a really great example here. It's frequent, it's repetitive, but it's also absolutely crucial. You have to get it right because it's so integrated into the way that all legal teams do their work. And then finally, we ask whether it's user-centric. Have you just come up with this idea to solve your problem, or does it actually solve a problem for the people who you want to use it? Because if it doesn't, they're just going to find a way around it. We found that these 4 ingredients are essential to choosing the right project for automation. Ultimately, though, if you really want to know whether it's going to work, whether it's a good idea, you are just going to actually have to prototype and test it. There are no 2 ways around that. Okay, just before we get to the Q&A, I wanted to give you a little bit of direction from our experience at Joseph on how to get started. 3 quick steps. The first one is just to plan, map it out, figure out what you need, how it's going to work, who's going to own the tool. You really do have to start there before you dive into anything. Second, figure out what you need to execute. You know, what resources do you need? Who do you need on board? What's the right tool? Third, get those stakeholders on board early. Be open and honest about expectations in the process. And I think if you do those three things, then you'll be pretty close to ready to at least get started. Okay, last thing is a lot of this is what we do at Joseph all the time. I mean, we spend our days talking to people in teams that look a lot like Anna and Gary's, and hopefully like the firms and corporate legal teams that are being inspired by this webinar. And so we decided that we're really happy to offer our time, the time of our customer team, to help any of you working through this first stage. Not the what technology is right, but just how you decide what to automate. And so we've decided that we're just going to, and I'm posting it in the chat here, make available our team. If you're interested in an ideation session at any point, feel free to come and have a chat to us, register via the bot, and we will be in touch if we think that we can help you. But otherwise, with that, a big thank you to everyone for coming to the session. Thanks to Anna and Gary. Thanks to Terry for pulling it all together. Thank you for all of your time. It's really greatly appreciated, and we hope that it sets you up to build the right it. You know, that's ultimately what this is all about. If you want to learn more about Joseph or any of the things we've spoken about, feel free to find us on the web. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand back over to Terry.
Thank you very much, Tom. And thank you also, Anna and Gary. Fabulous presentation. And I know I was furiously taking a lot of notes, and I'm sure everyone else was exactly the same. So love it, love it, love it. And I know that all of you would also be open to folks reaching out to you, for example, on LinkedIn and whatever, if they have a question or something that you can help with. You know, one of the things that I just want to underscore is both the generosity of everyone in this session, but the generosity of everyone in the community more broadly. It's really just quite amazing how much people are willing to give their time. So thank you to all of you in addition to the presentation today. There is one quick question here, which I'm just going to pose, and it was something that I think you started out with at the beginning, Tom. And it's a question that's been put to us. What was the solution for the client who didn't want PowerPoint presentations? And I think their audio cut out kind of as you're perhaps addressing that.
No problem, and apologies for the audio cutting out. The solution that the firm came up with was to have the agenda for their meetings on placemats, so that everyone who turned up just turned up to a meeting and everything they needed was in front of them on the table already, so that no one had to click through another PowerPoint presentation every time they met. It's a simple thing, although I'm not exactly sure how we do placemats in this lockdown COVID world. But anyway, that's that.
Terrific. And I've got a quick question for all of you. There's still a little bit of technophobia. I'm being generous here within the community, and it's, you know, those things when they go wrong, unfortunately, they live for a very long time in everyone's memory. So in terms of rolling out an automation project, as I say, this is a question for all of you. I'd just love to hear from you about this. How important is it to spend time in that testing phase or beta phase with the plethora of stakeholders or small group of stakeholders that it may be created for? And I guess just in terms of being instructive here, assuming that time is spent on it, typically what is that sort of time? And I understand that's obviously going to differ depending on the size of the project, but just to give folks some parameters to work with.
I'm happy to start that one. I think for us, I mean, firstly, if something hasn't happened within 3 months and you've been tinkering in the background, it typically loses momentum. It doesn't matter if it's a large or small initiative. In terms of sort of getting it started, you've probably heard the word iterations quite often in this session. For us, we actually almost start off with, I know it's a bit of a dirty word, but skunk works, right? So actually looking at something and just doing something very basic initially that really doesn't cost any money. So typically a proof of value, or it's very, very cheap and doesn't involve too many stakeholders. So actually proving the value internally first before you start building out a stakeholder ecosystem. That means by the time you get to the stakeholders and you're asking for money and business cases, you've actually built in your own mind a sense of confidence that you can take this to your broader stakeholder group.
Yeah, fantastic. And Anna, I'm going to ask this question that's just popped up as well, if I may, to you. And we've all heard it many times before. So Tom and Gary, you may have a few things to add here. But how do you get commitment from lawyers who are time poor and, you know, I'm going to paraphrase this now, maybe by their nature more interested in things that relate very strictly to the legal work in front of them, which they would not necessarily see as including the sorts of things we're talking about today. So Anna, if I can ask you that question and then maybe get Gary, you and Tom to comment on it as well.
I think there are two key ways, Terry. You've got to target your lawyers who you know are going to win from the savings in time and efficiency from your automation. And in our case, we chose use cases that those lawyers used because they were the winners. And so, you know, it's easy to get somebody involved in improving their lot. It's a bit more difficult if you're getting people involved to improve the lot of others and then you're sort of trying to win two sets of people over. And I think the second thing is that they have to have, if you can build it somehow into their performance goals so that they're going to get rewarded for contributing to an initiative, you know, such as, you know, building an automation bot, then again, they're doubly incentivized to sort of balance their BAU work with contribution to the strategic initiative. And we did that as well. And I think the combination of those two things, you will get the right set of people who are motivated in the right way to deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gary, I've actually got another question for you here, so I might direct this one to you. How do you know you're on track with matching the process to technology, particularly if you've got new tech that you're piloting?
So we run everything using agile sprints. So it's a 2-week cycle, typically speaking, for each sprint. And at the end of each sprint, we do what's called a retrospective, and we look back to see that we've met defined criteria. So it's particularly important, though, if you're going to define criteria in relation to automation, you do something that's not too fuzzy. There are nice fuzzy wins. In other words, it moves people up the stack because the machine does the dirty work. That's sort of a given. But if you can define metrics that are genuinely objective and measurable, i.e. this process used to take X amount of time, now it takes it's been reduced by X amount of time, and you've seen that in your sprint, then you continue going and, you know, building on from there.
Fantastic. And we've got one final question. I'm just going to squeeze this one in before we get to the end. And again, potentially for all of you, do you tell folks in your organisation that you are saving them time and money? Like you spoke of metrics, particularly, Gary, but is that one of the metrics that you're kind of bubbling up to the top all the time as well?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm very committed to, and I can see there's some people on my team on the line, but they will know this, is we do a case study after every single piece of work we do. It's a single page template that I define it by saying you should be able to give it to the man or lady in the street who knows nothing about the automation or the project, and they should be able to understand it. And it has very clear metrics that are both quantitative and qualitative. You do that, and every time you do that, you get permission to go bigger and to increase your investment. And so that's why we've gone from small to fairly large in terms of the automation stack. Fantastic.
And Anna and Tom, just going to get you to raise hands. Are they part of your metrics as well? Yes. Yep. Okay. So it's a big yes on that one, I think, all round. Folks, unfortunately, we do have to close. What a fantastic session. As I say, I just loved it. And, I'll send you my notes to prove it. Really, really fantastic. Lots of great stuff there. Really, really love that it was just so practical for everyone. Just some amazing takeaways there. Thank you so much indeed. Thank you, everyone, for attending as well. It was wonderful to have you here with us. Don't forget that episode 4 will be upon us before you know it, on the 22nd of September. That one's on building a business case, and I think we've started to bubble up and touch on some of those things today. So we'll do a bit more of a deeper dive into that one with Evan Wong from Checkbox and Alex Rosenrauch from PwC New Law. So that should be a great one as well. If you want information about what the Centre is doing, and I certainly hope you do, please do follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. And that being said, again, Tom, Anna, Gary, fantastic. Thank you so much indeed. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.